All right, everyone. We are live. We're live on LinkedIn. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook. I am here with Dr. I should say, Jonathan Tam. John, how's it going?
Going well.
Fantastic. John, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started, because we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff today.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm hitting on all your credentials.
Yeah, well, a little bit about myself. I help millennial professionals find their dream careers and essentially transition into them. And my own background is I have a PhD in sociology from the University of Oxford. I was previously an educator. I taught high school for a number of years. And then I decided to get that PhD, as all good Asians are supposed to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust you if you were at least that qualified, you know?
Yeah, well, but I think it speaks to the whole immigrant Asian expectation aspect of the workplace, and how sometimes we have to use different types of credentials to prop ourselves up in the Western world. I mean, it's a whole sociology thing, debate, and of course you can just prove your own value without these credentials, but the literature does show that it makes it easier. So there's a whole discussion on this, but that's not part of the intro. The intro is I help millennial professionals.
We're diving right into it.
Yeah, dive right into it, right?
No BS, nothing. Okay, well, I think essentially what we're going to do in this live chat, we're going to talk about how career clarity fits into the job search, why it's so important, because I think a lot of my viewers as well, they're people who are looking for either their first job, or they've moved into a new country and they're looking for their first position now. So the challenge usually is, do I settle for a job, or do I wait for the right job, or maybe do I have to undershoot so I can get something and get started? You know what I mean? So I think we can cover that whole spectrum in this live stream. What do you think?
We'll try. That's a lot to cover, but we'll try. We'll try.
We want to put that PhD to use, man. We can't just let it sit around. We gotta flaunt it. Let me just get this LinkedIn stuff sorted out. I'll just make sure it's being shared with my network and your network, and then we'll get right to the live stream. Okay, by the way, if you guys are watching and you want to leave some questions, leave them below in the chat, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll get to your question at the end. But let's just start with defining career clarity, okay? For people who are watching this, who are like, I'm just looking for a job. Why do I need career clarity? So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's, career clarity is essential to finding a job that makes you happy. I mean, and this is what the literature shows in terms of psychology, right? The psychology of money is essentially, if you hit a certain threshold, 60K, for example, in Vancouver, where you're at, it's probably going to be around 80K. But if you hit around 60K per year, you are going to be happy, right? You're going to be okay. You're not threatened by anything. You're not going to die in a Western society, developed world. What happens then is, at that point, you will hit diminishing returns in terms of the more money you get, it's not going to make you any happier, right? Or it's going to make you a little bit happier, like, before it's like this, but then you hit a threshold and it becomes like this. More money doesn't mean more happiness. And that's why, for a lot of people, if you are trying to make ends meet and you just got to pay the bills, then yeah, a job is very, very important. But for a lot of people, if that end is taken care of, then the pursuit becomes something else, which is fulfillment, satisfaction, and just happiness in what you do. And so it goes back to the whole, is it a job or a career thing, right? What's the difference between a job and a career? A job is basically someone paying you money for time, right?
Right.
And however, when you go to a career, it's like, okay, it's a series of jobs on some form of trajectory. And of course, this whole idea of a trajectory is being challenged nowadays because we're moving away from titles to skills in the place. And you also have a situation where, people are hopping all over the place in a way that doesn't really make sense. But at the end of the day, it's about what you do that makes you happy, that makes you fulfilled. And having that fulfillment is almost part and parcel to the whole career idea. And then that goes to the next idea of vocation, right? What's a vocation? And we're getting into semantics and a lot of words here.
Right.
But a job and career are fundamentally different.
Okay, well, are you saying that your career clarity should be important at later stages of your career? For example, if you're looking for your first job, do you need that clarity going into the first job, or do you experiment with a bunch of different jobs and then you realize this is what I want to do, this is what I don't want to do?
Well, random actions lead to random results, right?
Right.
And so if you want to put yourself in a position where you can flourish, then you got to do it, like, do the work, do the research. And nowadays there's so much disruption. Like we're going through a black swan event right now with COVID, obviously. But other forms of disruptions coming, right? You have AI, automation, robotics. You have 5G that's coming like a slow moving freight train, which is going to rock everything. Zoom is probably going to be outdated once 5G hits, and then we're going to go into like holograms or whatever. Like seriously, we're going to like enter some crazy Iron Man stuff in the future, right? And that's why, like, okay, well, are you sure you want to randomly navigate this? Are you sure you don't want to like think ahead on what you want to do when you position yourself in terms of how you upskill, how you develop your career, what credentials or what skills you get, right? These all matter.
Right. I have a two-part question. Let's talk about the first one, especially when you talked about the current situation, right, and COVID, right? A lot of people aren't thinking, I want to get a job that really fits my career ambitions. They're thinking, I just need work right now. I need something to pay the bills and all of that. So I'm wondering, is it a good idea to go with that approach? Because I've seen a lot of people settle for things they're overqualified for or jobs they don't really like. Given the current market, what would you recommend in their situation?
Everyone's different, to be honest. And that's why you got to go to the drawing board and really evaluate what you can do, right? What's your runway? How much time can you put aside to making a pivot if you do intend to make a pivot? What's your financials like? Are all your ducks in a row? Do you have to stay in a certain city to take care of your loved ones? Like if you have aging parents or if you have kids that need to go to school, and that stability is important. And that's why, when I work with my clients, the very first thing is like sorting out, okay, what do you want? And then what are the priorities? And then from there, you do the research and planning. Because if you don't know what you want, you don't know what your priorities are. I mean, like all this talk is, doesn't mean much. And it's got to be strategic and deliberate.
Right. Let's talk about that, actually. Yeah. What are the consequences of not knowing what you actually want for your career?
Well, random, like I said at the get-go, like random action leads to random results. And so one of the common problems that we have that I see in a lot of my clients is they all love getting their masters. Like, right. And I mean, you have a master's, right?
Yeah, now I'm feeling a little insecure about
What are you doing now with your master's, right? I mean, okay, no, yeah. I'm laughing, but at the same time, I'm laughing at myself too. I have 2 masters and a PhD, right? And so, like, I
don't feel so bad.
Yeah, don't feel so bad. I mean, I don't regret the PhD, of course. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime thing, right? Yeah. But I think in a sense, a lot of times, if you don't really plan it out, you're going to throw money at the wrong things. You're going to throw money at the wrong investments, thinking that another degree is going to get you somewhere, going to get you what you need. And essentially, it's all about planning ahead and, like, what do you need? What's your goal, and how do you close that skills gap? And do you need any extra credentials? And most of the time, you don't. You just need to close the skills gap and demonstrate that you've closed the skills gap.
Isn't the skill gap closed with getting a new certification or with getting a new degree? Because that's what a lot of people do. They go into the job market, they look at the jobs, they're like, well, this requires this certification, that certification. I'm not qualified. Let me just go back and get another degree.
Well, yeah, and that's the nature of the job market, right? There are certain fields of work that are closely guarded with credentials and certifications. So you need to know exactly, your destination in order to make sure you get the right one, which actually goes to my point, where if you don't know what your destination is, what kind of master should you be getting, right? So for example, I have a friend he's a oral surgeon, right? And an oral surgeon, and what is actually quite interesting is that oral surgery and plastic surgery is essentially, they both, fix your face, basically.
Right.
And he can do the same thing as a plastic surgeon, but because of the different titles, they all mark their own territory with their associations, and then you need these credentials and so on. And that's why you need to know what credentials you need to get. and plan accordingly. Because if you don't have clarity on that, I mean, like you're throwing money at, you're throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping it'll stick.
Yeah.
That just doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's kind of my story as well, because when I went abroad to do my education, I was like, what's the easiest thing I can do that allows me to get out of the country? And like, oh, business, let's do that. It's not like I wanted to do business. I wasn't really interested in it. It's just when I got to the university and I realized I don't want to do financial accounting and all this stuff. I'm not good at it. I started doing public speaking, teaching other people. That's how I shifted into education. So for me, it came from trial and error more than anything else, right?
Yeah. I mean, trial and error is definitely one way to go about it. And if you're lucky, then awesome. But at the same time, not everyone's got the same amount of resources, right?
Right.
And I think that it also goes to the whole immigrant thing that I mentioned earlier. I mean, immigrants are fundamentally different in their experience in terms of people who are going from one country to another. So in your case, and it's not, and this applies to not just people from South Asia, but East Asia as well. A lot of people in the 90s, they wanted to leave China, right? And you see a lot of people leaving Hong Kong, leaving China, in hopes that, the West is going to be provide them a better livelihood. And so during that process, they'll take any job. Like they'll literally do anything to get out. Yeah. And then you look at their kids. Well, their kids are, now looking at, hey, I want to be a lawyer, doctor, accountant, or whatever. And this is called what we call the second generation, like the immigrant advantage. All second generation kids exhibit this, and not only the Asians or Southeast Asians, South Asians, but also for Black people, also for whites, right? And so essentially the second generation, you always have this sudden surge of, hey, we're going to work hard, we're going to get our credentials, we're going to, make our parents' effort work, make sense. Once we get to the third generation, it just kind of like the whole
it levels out.
It goes off. It goes away. But at least it lasts for 2 generations, right?
Yeah,
but
I totally get
back to your point in terms of getting that degree, and what's your goal? And if your goal is just to get out of the country and immigrate, then that is what it is.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, because especially when you're abroad and your parents have really put all the pennies together to pay for your education and pay for your immigration, you have to have a sense of gratitude going into it. You're like, my parents did all of this. I better not mess up. Let me make something of myself. And I'll admit that's a lot of pressure that I came to the country as well. I was like, this is my second shot. I'm doing my master's. I've done my undergrad before. I need to make something of myself now. And that's why I didn't go to any of these parties at universities. I didn't waste any time going to all these places. And I was just working. But I think there's a lot of people who come abroad, and for them, like you mentioned, the primary motive is to leave the country and start something fresh. But they're so focused on that aspect that once they come abroad, they're like, okay, I'm here, but I don't really know what I'm doing with my life, career-wise. You know what I mean? So in that situation, what should they be seeking?
In that situation, they should make sure, they need to decide what their priorities are. If it's stability, so for example, if they've got a family to take care of, they got bills to pay, you got a mortgage, you can't haphazardly just say, I'm gonna transition to something, right? That's just irresponsible. Once at some point in life, once you're responsible for other people, you realize you can't move that. You can't just pack your bags and do something else like you were in your 20s, and that's why. Life stage matters. Life stage research shows that, and I have a video coming out actually in a couple of days, tomorrow, talking about career crossroads in people's 40s, right? And people talk about a midlife crisis. And you look at my face right now, I look like I'm in my 20s, but I'm actually like almost 40, right? I'm actually almost 40, right? Right. And the fact of the matter is, we have a lot of midlife triggers. So people call it midlife crisis, but it's actually a more technical term is midlife triggers. Whereas like your parents are getting old, your kids are getting older, your health is beginning to really hit the wall, and you really got to get that in line. You may start, you're starting to get threatened by the young guns who are entering the job market that charge half the amount that you charge, that you command in terms of your salary and benefits. And what's to stop a company from hiring 3 of those guys to replace one of you, especially if you're replaceable, right? And so all these, and then there's other a whole bunch of other triggers. Like, anyways, I don't have to talk about too much about that. But essentially, you need to sort out at that point. Okay, if I want to make a move, what's a what is the runway? What is the plan? How am I going to do it? And how am I going to do the research? How am I going to connect my way into that industry? Because as you know, I mean, only 20% of the jobs are posted, right?
Right.
And any position, if you are in your 40s, and any position that you would want to transition into would probably be mid-level or above. And those jobs are typically not the ones that are posted.
Yeah, because you have a lot of immigrants who come with a lot of experience. Like a lot of people I talk to, they come from India, they come from Bangladesh, whatever, and they've got 10 years of HR experience. And when they try to get a job in Canada, it's like, well, no one's hiring me at my level, regardless of my experience. What do you think they should do in that situation?
I mean, the obvious thing is just these say network.
Right. Network. What does that even mean? Everyone keeps saying that.
I know. What does that even mean, right? And the fact is you have limited time, and so if you are to network, you have to concentrate your efforts on a goal.
So let's talk about that. When you say when you're networking to find a job, what does that actually mean?
When you're networking to find a job, I mean, I think the best and most straightforward way to do it, I mean, because anytime you walk up to a stranger and you're like, and you come up with an ask, that just comes like across as totally slimy. Like nobody wants to network like that. You never network with, I mean, you never go in with the intent with an ask. If the side benefit is, a job interview that comes from it, then awesome, right? But essentially, this is pretty much, I mean, none of this is like a secret. It's just informational interviews are super useful just to learn about a company that you're interested in. So you set that target. You set a target in terms of the company, industry function, the level, the geography, the pay scale. I mean, all that. You set a target as closely defined as possible. You find someone in that target company who is in that position, or maybe 5 years down the road of where you want to be. And you basically, you talk to them, you reach out to them. Hey, I'm interested in this. What can you tell me about this position? And then you learn more about that individual. Don't go in expecting a job interview, because if there's no job interview, they'll bounce. I mean, it's like this conversation is over. But you go in, you learn about it, and you ask them, if I'm to enter a position like yours, what should I do to prepare for it, right? And then exactly what skills gap, what credentials you need, what skills gap you got to close, and all that stuff. And eventually you can, start planning your way and pivoting your way into that. But I mean, if you don't, and that's really strategic networking. If you just network and you go on LinkedIn and you add a whole bunch of random people, you use Linked Helper and run a bot, you hire a VA from Philippines to like add random people. I mean, like that. I mean, stuff like that doesn't help. I mean, that won't get you very far. So it's got to be purposeful. It's got to be deliberate. It's got to be targeted, and in order to help you actually, make a transition. I mean, what do you think?
I love that idea of informational interviews. It's the primary strategy I have with my clients, and I have some clients that I work with who are just so personable. Like you talk to them and the passion is oozing out of their body. One conversation with them and you can tell this guy's all about marketing, or this guy's all about accounting, or whatever it may be. And all of that does not translate well on their resume, especially if they're immigrants, especially if they don't have any work experience. So I've seen people have one conversation with a hiring manager and they're like, I'm so glad you reached out. I love how enthusiastic you are. You know what? We've got a role opening up. But one thing I've been struggling to tell my clients and some of the other job seekers is the connection between informational interviews and actually how that allows you to get a job. Because it's not something you do and you get a job, right? No. You're building a relationship, and over time it gets you a job. So I'm hoping you can break that down a little bit. How does informational interviews actually lead to getting a job?
Well, informational interviews lead to getting a job because first of all, when you think about a geography, like for example, downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, a specific industry, a specific function, right? If you think about that in terms of a community, people generally don't move around too much, right? Especially after you hit a certain point in a certain age in your life, you don't migrate as much. Right. And what happens is that community is actually much smaller than you think. And everyone kind of just knows one another, especially after all these years of interacting. And so what happens is, if you know one or two people and then they're able to connect you to one or two more and one or two more. And over time, you will know a lot of the people in the industry. You're able to position yourself as an insider of that industry. At least when they click your LinkedIn profile, it's like, oh, they know all these people. Like, this guy or this girl is legit. They are, part of this, what we call in sociology, we call this community of practice, this community of people who specialize on doing this task. And so by doing that ahead of time, then what happens is over time, you're able to just become one of them. But if you don't put in that effort to really leverage, to build this, what we call social capital, what happens is, and that's the main problem that immigrants struggle with actually, is they lack social capital. And one of the worst things that could happen for an immigrant, and I'm not saying this, it's a worst thing as in like it's regrettable, but it's also necessary, is that a lot of immigrants, when they first immigrate over, they automatically plug into their immigrant networks.
Yeah, definitely.
And that creates a cycle of ethnic enclaves where, in Toronto, we have Pacific Mall, right? Which is basically like a Chinese mall. And people, Chinese, Hong Kong business people will immigrate over, connect with other Hong Kong people, build their business around a Hong Kong network, a Chinese network. And basically that's what they do for the next 20, 30 years. And they struggle to become mainstream as a result. And then they're kind of stuck. And so, one of the wonders, and one of the major advice that I'd give any immigrant coming into Canada or North America is that you got to step out of that ethnic enclave as soon as possible. Do some and focus on a target industry, and talk to people there and start getting connected and figure out how you're going to get there. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to settle for plan B, which is working at a local Chinese canteen or whatever, and that's it. That's your career. And that's just unfortunate because you are skilled, you are talented, you made it out of the country for a reason.
Yeah.
So
it's very unfortunate because of the job seekers that I've been talking to. I've seen a lot of them getting taken advantage by people from their own community, which is, it's pretty sad to see.
You're right.
Right? Because it's like people from their community already settled abroad in Canada, and then someone coming in, they know nothing about it. They use that as leverage. Like, hey, trust me, I'm one of you, but I know exactly how the system works. Yep. Take this crappy job for this crappy pay because, I know about the market more than you do. They come here and they're grateful because they're like, I've got a job, I've got all this stuff. And then in a month or 2 months, they're like, you know what? I'm getting severely underpaid for the kind of work I do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you are exactly right. That's exactly what happens. And a lot of times that's where, all of the shady under the table deals, cash salary and all that stuff. Basically you work in the ethnic enclave black market. That's basically what happens for a lot of people. And so that's why if you've got skills and you've immigrated based on, skilled immigration, you should seriously look for that kind of job rather than just settle on whatever's available to you.
Yeah, just to talk about that informational interview piece a little bit, I've noticed, and this came as a surprise to me. I was talking to someone who immigrated to Canada, and she was talking about, hey, I've reached out to all these recruiters that said, hey, can you give me a referral? Can you tell me about this job? And of course, that doesn't work here in Canada, right? You can't just go up to someone and say, hey, give me a referral. No. And she was like, yeah, this is not working. I was like, well, obviously it's not working, right? Why have you tried reaching out to them and asking them for advice? And she said, don't you think that's going to be really rude? I was like, why would that be rude? Like, well, I'm beating around the bush. I just want them to help me get a job. So in her mind, it was like, if I'm being straightforward and telling them exactly what I want, I'm doing them justice. Whereas if I'm trying to ask for advice and kind of trying to loop around it, I'm doing them injustice. I found that really fascinating because I didn't even think about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally know what you mean. And in a sense, that's where it comes down to not knowing certain norms of behavior in the West.
Right.
This is the whole culture gap bit, right? Where you don't understand what's desirable in the West. So, for example, here's what we know in sociology, right? And actually, this is more like social psychology. What we know is that, for example, extroverted behavior is generally looked up to in the West. If you walk up, chest puffed up, and you're talking and you're shaking hands, firm handshake, and you speak as for a guy, so you speak in a deeper voice, and you're very social and all that stuff.
Right.
That's considered desirable behavior. But in China, in Hong Kong, and also I'm guessing also in South Asia, from my understanding, is that people who are introverted people who are able to concentrate on a subject matter and master that, and they don't have to always raise their hand and speak, like, be the first to speak in the classroom or the first to speak in the meeting, and just blurt out whatever is on their mind, even though it may be like useless advice. Like people who are able to sit down and really concentrate and hone in on what they do, that is considered desirable behavior in the East or in the South or in South Asia, right? I'll just put Asia in the East right now. You immigrate to Canada or to the US, you suddenly have a whole different set of soft skills that's considered desirable. And you are, as a subject matter expert, you remain quiet in a meeting and think like, okay, I'll wait for my chance to speak. Well, if you don't speak out, no one's ever going to ask you for your opinion.
Right.
Because this is the West. And so different norms of behavior, what are the desirable soft skills? Do you know how to show it? Do you know how to signal properly that you are an expert, that you are good at what you do, or that you desire that, you deserve that promotion? And this is a typical ceiling for a lot of immigrants, is that they're considered as the master of their art, and you stick them in a cubicle and you make sure they do the work, and you don't promote them because they're seen as quiet. They don't exhibit traditional Western leadership qualities, and they also speak with an accent. So people feel like people who speak with an accent are, intellectually inferior or something. I don't know. But the truth of the matter is they speak another language, right? They speak one more language than you.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things that immigrants in the workplace would typically struggle with. And that's why having clarity and figuring out where you want to go with your career and strategically planning accordingly, and also learning the Western norms of signaling. How do you show that you're good at what you do in the West? That's something else.
Okay. Another question I have just based on that is, when you are an immigrant and you come to Canada, right, and you're trying to look for a job, you're doing all these informational interviews, what I've noticed is, and this is a recurring pattern, is people, they gauge their progress in their job search according to how many jobs they've applied to, right? So I'll say, hey, what do you do every single day? Oh, I applied to 5 jobs today, 10 jobs tomorrow, whatever. And they'll gauge their progress. The more they apply, eventually that lucky little dart's going to land right in the center and they're going to get a call. I personally don't think that's a very good measure of your job search progress. Is there a better way to know when you're making progress in your job search? Well, I think in the job search process, the best thing to do, is always quality over quantity. I was on a call today with someone, and this lady, she applied to 200 positions in the last month. Right. Wow. And, wow. That's hustle, right? That's like real hustle. That's wow. Yeah. But at the same time, is she able to tailor the resume to fit the job description? It's basically impossible to do it at scale, right? It's not possible. And, she got 4 callbacks, and that's good. That's considered good. But at the same time, you could use your time better. And it is using that informational interview approach, networking, and letting people know what you're good at so that you are top of mind. And right now, I think with COVID, a lot of times people are like, and even us as career coaches, right? It's hard to get a job, like period right now. Oh, yeah. And so right now, the strategy is not about getting a job. The strategy is positioning. Position yourself so that when the 40 million jobs are opened up, it's going to blow over eventually. And 40 million jobs in the US alone are going to be higher, need to be replaced. They need to be filled, right? Yeah. And positioning yourself in a way that when the floodgates open, you are first in line. And that's basically the strategy. Because otherwise, the best career coach in the world is going to struggle to get you a job at this point. That's such a good point, because a lot of the clients I work with are like, hey, listen, man, I've been out of a job for 3 to 4 months. I need something now. Let's make something happen now. And it's impossible to make those guarantees, right? Not only in the COVID times, but just in general. Like there's too many factors in line for a career coach to guarantee you a job. That's just never going to happen. But I think a really good point you bring up is establishing these connections before any role goes up. Or for me personally, I don't think there's ever a time where it's too early to network. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, I totally agree. And to your point as well, in terms of like a career coach
can we guarantee people getting jobs? And I think of that video that you made. I think you rolled it out last week about, should you hire me as a career coach one, right? Should you get a coach one? And you made a great point there where it's like, well, if you can hire a trainer, it doesn't mean you automatically get a six-pack. You gotta put in the work, man. Right? And the fact is, if you hire a trainer and you don't put in the work, I mean, people who pay attention. Yeah. If you get a free trainer, they're not. I mean, even then, you're just gonna waste your time, and they may waste your time, and it's like this. The commitment's not really there. But once there's a monetary exchange, and once you decide to commit and put the money in, whether it's in your specialty, which is getting people interviews, or my specialty in helping people find that clarity and plan that transition, once you put that investment in, that's where things really happen. Because when you pay attention, right?
Yeah, you can find every bit of what comes out of my mouth on the internet for free, and yours, mine, whatever, everything. I don't know about Oxford PhD, but I'm pretty sure on 99%.
I would say mine's a little bit higher. I mean, it's a little. You need a little bit more of a shrink kind of approach. To do that, but you can still research it. It's all in textbooks, right? Yeah, like 99% of information you can find on the internet for free. Yeah. But if all of that information is available for free and people are still having trouble with, say, it's their job search or their fitness or their anxiety, whatever it might be, there's a missing link there. And I think the missing link is accountability and commitment. Well, that's one. That's two missing links. I think another major one is the paradox of choice. Okay. Paradox of choice. And I forgot the name. I forgot who threw this term out, but it's a wonderful term that I think everyone should know. Is that the more choice you have, or you're gonna freeze, right? You don't know which advice is the right one. And at the end of the day, probably 90% of the advice. Okay, 90% of the advice. There's. You want to take a shot here, aren't you? Those LinkedIn influencers that are throwing trash advice. You are right here at this, but like someone just posted do stay under the radar, right? That was one post from our common connections. Like someone gave advice on LinkedIn, like stay under the radar. Like, that's just bad advice. You guys
just be invisible. Just make sure no one's seeing you. It works really well. Just don't talk to anyone.
Right. I mean, and so I lost my train of thought. But basically, the whole idea is you want
the paradox of choice you were talking about.
Paradox of choice, right? You want to have a system and approach that will generate consistent results. Right. And that's why when you go online and you take piecemeal advice from YouTube or from blogs, you're going to get piecemeal results because it's not a system, right? And that's the difference between what you and I do. We have a system in place where we can consistently get people results. Yeah. Because we've done this time and time again, and we get the same feedback and we get the same results. It's proven. Yeah. And that's the difference, right? You're buying time.
I'll actually share something with you. I did this earlier. When I go on LinkedIn, there's like so much advice on job searching. Like even I'm like, there's so much. Like, what do I work on, right? So I have this thing installed on my my browser. It just blocks off the feed. Like there's
wow.
And I've got the same thing on Facebook.
Wow.
So I log in and I do what I want to do. I don't get distracted by what everyone else has to say. And it just makes it easier because you don't get diluted in a bunch of information. Because you know this and I know this. I could say one thing about, hey, this is the best way to get a job. You go to 3 other LinkedIn influencers. They'll have their own little shtick. One will have an acronym like FAST, F-A-S-T, whatever. Everyone's got their own thing. And then you get confused. Like, wait, what am I doing? And then you just end up not making any progress in your job search, don't you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, totally. And I think going back to the immigrant problem, a lot of people who don't know, you don't know what you don't know, right? Yeah. But that applies especially to people who are new to the country, who don't know what's right or wrong. And they hear, and for you and I, we see this kind of like bad advice and we're like, it's stuff for us to rail against, and we love doing that. But at the same time, there are real people that are getting hurt by this advice. Yeah. And like there's this there's this one guy who we talked about where he was like, don't talk, stand out in your resume. Don't talk about how good you are at your skills. Talk about how you are like you are the best local ping pong aficionado or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, I'm like, are you serious? Someone actually gets that in their resume. You are screwing them over a job. They have a family to feed. They have kids looking up to them. They have a wife who relies on them, or a husband that relies on them, or they have parents that need to be taken care of. Like, this is the advice you're throwing out on a professional platform.
Let's talk about that. What is some of the worst advice you've heard thrown off? Let's talk about that.
I mean, that was one of the worst I've seen.
Okay.
How about you?
What was it? I'm just so sick and tired of the post of bash recruiters and managers, man. I'm so sick of it, honestly. Recruiters, stop asking for 5 master's degrees, 3 PhDs for a minimum.
Agreed?
Agreed? Yeah, agreed. Okay. Now I think there is merit to this, because there are some job postings that are posted. It says 5 years experience, and on the bottom it says entry-level job. Okay, that I've seen that. Now, the role itself is not entry-level, but the recruiter is being lazy, because when you go to the ATS, there's a very clear option on the bottom that says, what tier of job is this? Is this entry level? Is this an internship? Is this part-time? Whatever. Sometimes what recruiters do, they make the whole job posting, they write everything down, and they forget to change that little tab on the bottom. And then the job goes live. Now, when job applicants are looking at the job, they're like, 5 years of experience for an entry-level job. What the hell's going on? Technically, it's not an entry-level job, but because the recruiter was too lazy to change the little tab on the bottom, it looks like an entry-level job. But I think this claim is so exaggerated on LinkedIn. If you want to go viral on LinkedIn, take as much hate you can spew on recruiters and on hiring managers, and you will go viral, because there's so many job searchers in the market who, and I understand this, but they're looking for someone to blame. They're like, I'm applying, I'm doing this, I'm doing everything I can.
For the people, man, for the people.
Exactly. It's not my fault. It's someone else's fault that I'm not getting a job, right? I understand that, but I never think that's a good approach. I don't like blaming someone else for your problem. Even though it might be true, I think intrinsically there has to be an element of taking responsibility, whether it's in your hands or not. And I don't think it reflects well on job seekers as well. Like, if you see job seekers on LinkedIn complaining about hiring managers the worst, recruiters are the worst. Well, listen, if you want a job, guess what? One of those people is going to have to hire you. And it's probably not going to put you in a good boat if you keep complaining on LinkedIn. So this whole content on LinkedIn about bashing hiring managers, bashing recruiters, I don't think is healthy, man.
Well, and sometimes it's just the process on how these job descriptions are made, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a master wish list of like 3 different departments who want to like hire someone to be that, middle person. And then they meet together. They have one like big powwow, the brainstorm dump. They throw all their requirements on there. And in reality, there's no such candidate that could fit this. One of my friends actually applied for this kind of position, and he had 3 department representatives interview him on the same interview. And at the end, he was like, so what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And both of them were like, they're just as clueless. And so a lot of times it's just how people work. That's how they put their ideas together. They create this wonderful wish list of whatever. And then like a real person can probably fill about 30 to 40% of it. And in that case, and that's why sometimes, if you have like 30 to 40% is a reach, but if you meet like 60 to 70% of the job description, just go, because the reality is there is a wish list element to it. And they also always ask for more so that the person has room to grow into that position as well.
Right. How do you distinguish between, okay, this sounds like something that I could kind of do, and not waste your time applying? Because I know some people, I talked to a candidate yesterday who was looking for an engineering position, and he was like, well, every single job I'm seeing requires 3 to 5 years of experience, and he's still applying to them with no engineering experience himself. Where do you draw the line between, you know what, I'm not qualified, actually, I think I can do this?
Well, I think it comes down to the basic and preferred requirements, the BR and PR, right?
Yeah.
And if you have the basic requirements, go for it. And you need to be able to distinguish which ones are the basic and which ones are the preferred ones. And sometimes if the basic ones is, you need 3 to 5 years of experience, then you need to look at, okay, do I have a combined 3 to 5 years of experience, whether it's, volunteer work, or whether it's freelancing work, whether it's consulting, whether it's full-time, whether it's internship, co-op, or whatever.
Right.
Can you put it all together to make the case for 3 years? And if you can, and if you're like 2 years, if you're at 2 years and like 9 months, or 2 years and 6 months, and just shoot the person a message on LinkedIn and say, hey, I got that. I mean, I have this.
Yeah.
Will you consider me? Should I even bother? Right. And a lot of times you're just one message away from clarifying.
We actually got a good question in the comments here. Shelly says, I think recruiters should recruit according to your expertise in a particular area, regardless of a well-known degrees. Now, you're someone who has a lot of degrees. What's your take on this?
Well, I think the future of work, and this is what the research has shown, the literature by McKinsey, Deloitte, and everybody out there right now, is that the workplace environment is now going to switch towards skills over titles and degrees. And this is from my conversations with hiring managers and other people in the field. Pretty much people are caring less and less about your degree and more what you can do. As long as you can prove you have the skills and the expertise, then yeah, I agree. I mean, that is the trend right now.
Yeah. And Shelly, I can tell you as a recruiter, the last thing my eyes fall on is your education section, unless it's specifically specified by the hiring manager. And there are cases like that. So, for example, some companies will have like a little pact with a university that, okay, we'll have your co-op students in our university, or we want fresh graduates only from UBC or UFT, whatever. In those cases, certainly there are exceptions. But for the vast majority of employers, there's no specification that we only want this university. So I think you're right that most recruiters will recruit you for the experience you bring to the table. I personally can't think of a time where I discredited someone's application because they weren't from the right university, unless specifically asked by the organization, because then you can't really say no. Hey, what do you mean you only want someone from UBC? This person's from University of Victoria. They can do the same thing. Well, if they want it, they want it, you know?
I think there's also an element of, now that the skills required in the job market is changing so fast.
Yeah.
It's basically almost impossible to keep up with those credentials. I mean, there is a case to be made about having an undergraduate degree, as Mark Cuban said in one of his YouTube videos. But after that, I think it's open game. I mean, I've helped people transition into software development and UX design. And then on Twitter, there's something called like the hashtag 100 days of code. And have you heard of that, Yasser?
Nope.
Yeah, well, there's a hashtag called 100 days of code. And for people who want to transition to doing coding as their primary skill. And pretty much it's a community of people who are throwing out resources at one another. And these resources are all free. But basically, you spend 100 days working on developing code, and by the end of it, you should be able to transition into an entry level role, and from there on, man, you've entered another field already. And so definitely nowadays the skill is more important than the title. We're just waiting for all the companies to recognize that, and the last ones to recognize it would be the big ones.
Oh, absolutely. And I think with what Shelly said, it's a little tricky as well, because I think the sentence ends at, I think recruiters should. Now, depending on who you are, you're going to have a very different preference. So right now, Shelly says, I think recruiters should recruit according to your expertise in a particular field. Tomorrow, you're going to have someone with no job experience. They'll say, I think recruiters should recruit based on passion, who wants the job more, who's got more energy. Everyone's got a different idea what a recruiter should do. Don't you think?
Yeah, totally. I totally think, and some people say, like, hire for the attitude, hire for the attitude, hire for, the drive, hire for, all those factors matter. And at the end of the day, people hire for three things, right? The what, the how, and the why. The what is what skills you have. How is how you fit with the team. What's the chemistry? And why is what motivates you. Every company prioritizes it differently. Yeah. And what we find is that entry levels generally just hire you for the what. You're just a grunt, you're cog in machine, and you just got to perform a task. But the higher you go, the more soft skills you need. And the more soft skills you need, the more leadership skills, the more communication, self-management, team management, project management, all that stuff starts coming in. And so at the end of it, and those are more transferable skills. So that's why when you hit the mid-level, or even, the C-suite level, the higher level, the VP level, that's where you can start really go from literally one industry to another, or one function to another, because what you're doing is fundamentally dealing with people and strategy. But when you're at the lower levels, what you deal with is the what, the tactics, the implementation. And in that case, yeah, you just need to have the skills to do it. And so, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, especially when you have client-facing roles where you have to represent the company. That's where you really need these leadership experience. So if you're being an account executive, account coordinator, account manager, and you're talking to companies' clients, if you mess that up, you can mess a pretty big deal for the company. They're not going to just put you up there. So that's where all these soft skills really come in. Got another question from Leonardo here. Leandro, sorry. Hello, guys. Thank you so much for the live stream. What's your experience regarding hiring MBA students as part-time? I think this person is probably coming to Canada as an MBA student, and they're wondering what kind of opportunities are. I think when you're, and I'm going to assume you're an international student. Please go ahead and correct me if I'm incorrect there. If you are coming in as an MBA, if you're coming in as a bachelor student, whatever, your part-time options are pretty limited, to be very honest, unless you find some specific. If we're talking retail jobs, then you're going to be the same as everyone else. You know, if you're working at a Staples, if you're working at a Source or a Best Buy, you're going to do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're studying MBA, it doesn't matter if you're doing a post-bac. But I have seen cases where some people will get like a freelance job. They'll work for the local newspaper because they've done some marketing work in the past. Now, that depends entirely on how good of a connection you can make and how much, how many skills that you bring to the table. But I think if you're coming as an international student, most likely you'll have to look for a typical part-time retail job. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of options nowadays that a lot of international students simply do not consider. So, for example, if you're an international student, one of the main inherent advantages that you're going to have is you have the ability to bridge cultures, because you are in another one. And so, and one of the things that people that's increasingly going to become a high value skill is the ability to bridge cultures and be a cultural broker. And so, basically, one of the things that you can do is definitely like learn more about the local culture. You can, volunteer work,
right?
You can hit the black market if you want.
You can hear that on my channel.
I mean, I'll say it right out. I mean, like, a lot of people work at in Toronto. Like, people work at Pacific Mall, Chinese
all the time.
All the time, right? And so, but that there are risks inherent to that. Another thing that you can do is just look online, like something like Upwork, Fiverr. If you are willing, if you have skills that you're willing to, and if you're looking for like let's see, part-time work, right? Well, if you're looking for part-time work and you don't expect to get paid that much, you really want to build that portfolio, get that experience, then going on Fiverr and Upwork and learning and building that digital portfolio, I think, is a very wise thing to do, especially nowadays. Like, and that just circumvents the whole the whole local the laws. So I think there's a lot of things, a lot of options available. You can do, but I think, like, if experience is the goal, then generally some people are turning down free work nowadays. Actually, people are turning down volunteer work. But there's that aspect that you can consider. If you want paid part-time jobs, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But
especially if you're planting your roots in a new country, your primary goal should be to develop the skill and make the connection. So you shouldn't be worrying too much about getting the right pay, especially if you're coming here to do your MBA. That's your sole focus, right? So I've got a lot of videos on my channel, Leandro, if you want to check that out as well, specifically about how much you should be focusing on your part-time work, because I'm a true believer, if you're coming to a new country, you want to get a lot of local experience, and the only way you can do that is through extracurricular work. I know people who do 2 part-time jobs to pay off their rent and whatever, and I understand that. But by the time you graduate, you've accumulated no skills outside the classroom, which is very detrimental, because there are going to be 400 people who graduate the same time you do. They're going to have a bunch of experience in their resume, and you're just going to have your part-time gig, and that can be pretty dangerous. Okay, we've got some love coming in. Thank you very much. Glad to Gaming 505 from India wants to study abroad. I want to know about jobs available in Canada. Well, there are plenty of jobs available in Canada.
There are.
Where can he find jobs available in Canada, John?
I mean, I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
You got to have a career goal. if your goal is just to have a job, any job, then seriously, you can find one in the black market. I mean,
you're really pushing that black market, aren't you?
well, no, like I was saying that as a joke, but it's also like it's a reality that people just fall into it because it's the first job available. And there's what I call a plan B job. There's a plan A job and there's a plan B job. A plan B job is what is expedient, what is convenient, what's the path of least resistance. And when you wonder 30 years down the road, how did my career end up like this?
Yeah,
that's probably why. I mean, that's one major reason why. So I would say go to the drawing board, figure out what you want to do, and go for it and aim for it. And if the job in Canada is, your goal is to just get your foot into Canada and then, pivot from there, then make that explicit and just embrace any job available. But if the plan is to have a satisfying career that will make you happy once you hit that 60K mark where you can live comfortably, and that's the long game, I believe. I truly believe that.
Got it. Is UBC better than Miguel? Glanto, I think our live stream is more focused on job searching, not so much education. In fact, not at all on education.
I can talk about this one.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for, like the department, and depends on if you're looking at ranking. Honestly, other than the University of Toronto, that stands head and shoulder above pretty much everything else in Canada. Next tier, you're talking at UBC and McGill, and at that point, you can't go wrong with either one of them. Pretty much anything in Canada that's like mid tier is gonna be fine.
Cool. There you go. Okay. Yep. Lander, excellent reply. I did look through your channel and it's been very helpful. Well, I'm glad it's been really helpful. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people out. So let's wrap things up, John. I think we've talked a lot about networking. We talked a lot about immigrants. I feel like we should have done the whole live stream on just immigrants and how they can transition back. That could have been a whole conversation in and of itself, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, I've lost track of the times where people who speak fluent English, and you and I speak fluent English, and that's something we're grateful for. But not everyone has that language ability, and sometimes it's just simply this that will hurt your chances in advancing your career, and that's just the cold reality of it. And so, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of the social capital, linguistic capital, the cultural capital, and these are all sociology terms I'm throwing out, but pretty much the ability to connect with people and understand and read the culture. These all matter, and that's why whenever when you're speaking to, I forgot his name, Leandro, when you're speaking to Leandro about finding part-time gigs, you really need to learn the local culture to really make use of, maximize this whole experience.
Right. I want to talk about something really quickly. This whole thing about, we talked about it earlier, the experience bit, right? Like, why do employers talk about experience? Why is it so important? And I think if we can actually fill in the gaps for job seekers, why experience is such a requirement, they might understand better. Just to give you an idea, what I mean is in some roles, employers really want to hire someone who can hit the ground running. Training is expensive, and you probably can speak to this more than I could, but they don't, especially if you're an immigrant, right? You are joining a company, you don't really know what it's like to work in a foreign environment. They have to train you on that or wait for you to adjust to the climate. Some people even don't know how to travel to the workplace because they're so fresh in the country. And then on top of that, they have to train you with the things you'll be doing on the job. So it takes whatever task that would take an experienced person to do in the first month or 2 months, that might take you 3 to 4 months to do, and that's going to come out of the company's pocket. I think that's a very important thing to note when trying to understand these jobs that are looking for job experience. What do you think?
I think that, I totally resonate with that. I'll add on top of that, I got to bring it back to clarity, man. If you don't know what you want to do and you end up entering a job thinking that that's what you want to do, or you take the first job available and you hate your position, and then you do it. You get onboarded, they train you and everything, and then you leave within a year before they're even able to get their ROI, the return on investment. Then basically you have just annoyed a whole bunch of people in that company, and anybody who referred you into that company is going to look bad. So you just burnt a bridge right there. And then you have a job hop scenario on your resume. And I talk about a job, like I have a whole playlist on job hopping on my YouTube channel, because that's a problem that a lot of people who don't have career clarity have. And so with that, then you think, okay, I'll look for the next best thing, right? And then you hop to another job. And I guess that my point is, it's so easy to end up with a job hopping resume.
Yeah.
Accident. And it's not, and nobody wants it. There's not a single job hopper in the, there are some job hoppers who deliberately do it, but it's with rhyme and reason. And it's a strategic move to get that raise, because they're still in the same career path trajectory. But there are people who are job hopping with no rhyme or reason. And that just sucks. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, just to build on that point as well, I know a very specific example of when this happened is a lot of immigrants, when they are hired, right, especially new to the market, they don't really know much about how much a job pays, what the pay scale is like, what the location is like. Is it too far away? Is it too close? They're just like, it's the first job I've gotten. I don't care. I'll do it. What ends up happening is once they get the job, they start getting comfortable. They start realizing, hey, my other immigrant friend is making $10,000 more for the same exact position. A lot of times what we've seen is they don't even make it to the 3-month probation period. They just eject out of that and go to a different role. So if you have two candidates with ideal experience, one's a local candidate, one's an international candidate who doesn't really know their way around the country, from a risk perspective, there is significantly less risk in hiring someone who knows the workplace environment, who knows the culture, and you can trust them that, okay, this person is not just going to leave because they found another opportunity. And I have seen this happen time and time again, and it's understandable. And I think there's the same example with rent, because when you move to a new city, you don't really know how much the rent is. You take the first thing that comes up and you're like, well, this place was a lot cheaper. I didn't even know. So that's a legitimate concern for companies, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, and it's totally reasonable. It's a totally reasonable concern. And you look at companies, and they look at their data as well. That's why a lot of companies are going. I mean, the high priority hires are referral based.
Yeah.
And number one, you give your friend a little extra boost in terms of their income, because a lot of companies incentivize referrals.
Yeah.
And so your friend gets paid a little bit more. Your chances of staying increases because you know what you're getting into. You automatically do that informational interview with your friend when they refer you in there. And so that's why a lot of times when we're talking about applying online, a lot of jobs online are you're competing with 100% of the job market for 20% of the jobs.
Yeah.
And also it's going to be, the chance of it being a fit is much lower. It's also usually an entry level job. Yeah. And so that's why, if you want to find something that's going to be long term and that's going to be worthwhile, using that network and building that network is so important.
Mm-hmm. I think we could just have a whole session on just informational interviews altogether.
We're gonna have one on info interview. We're gonna have one on immigrants. We're gonna have one on clarity. We have
everything. If you guys liked it this much, let me know in the comments. We'll answer it. We got a really good question from Anas Zubair. In most of the cases, a recruiter doesn't even bear to provide the feedback of the interview. That makes hinder to a candidate to analyze or improve his or her weakness or mistakes happen. I can shed quite a bit of light on this, but John, I want your take on this first. Why? And I know this is a case, a lot of recruiters just don't share feedback. Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of recruiters don't. I mean, you're the recruiter here, but I think a lot of recruiters don't share feedback because it takes a lot of time. I mean, would you agree?
Yes, but I don't think it's a primary reason.
What's the primary reason?
Well, it depends on which stage. I think he's talking about they don't provide feedback after the interview. I think fundamentally that isn't a good practice to do. You shouldn't interview someone and just ghost them. I don't think you should do that.
No, you shouldn't do that.
And it's so sad because this is the primary. So many job searchers complain about this. Hey, I had my interview 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard back. I've reached out to them 3-4 times. Mm-hmm. From a recruiter's perspective, they can't really give you feedback till a manager has made up their mind. Okay? If there are 5 people who've interviewed and the manager's like, out of these 5 people, I really like these 3, but unless I have someone secured, ready to go in the role, I want to make sure, and there's a term, keep them warm. Okay? I want to keep these other candidates warm till I make the hire. If this person drops out, say they get another offer, they jet out, I want to make sure I have these other 3 people as well. But unfortunately, what happens in the meantime is these other 3 candidates who've been interviewed are just kind of waiting around, which, I understand that. That's not a good process. The other problem with feedback is for legal reasons. And this can be a huge problem, because depending on the kind of candidate, you give them feedback and they don't like the feedback, they can contest it, they can argue it. And employers don't want to take the risk. They don't want to tell you that you don't get selected based on something. So the easiest thing for them to say is, thank you for your application. We decided to move forward with another candidate who fit the role better. It's like the most generic, state of the mill. You can't really argue that. If someone says we went with someone more experienced, what are you going to say? Well, show me his resume. I want to see what kind of experience. You're not going to do that, right? It's the most acceptable form of feedback. But to Anis's point, a lot of people don't provide feedback is because they don't have feedback from the manager. But from a recruiter's point of view, when they're dealing with 20 roles at the same time, and for each one of the 20 roles, they have 5 different candidates, and all of them are interviewing. One, to your point, John, time is the case. The other thing, the hiring manager just hasn't made a decision yet.
Well, I think on top of that, there's some things that the candidate can do on their part to mitigate this. Right. One of the questions that I'll always teach all my clients is, ask at the very end of the interview, given everything we've discussed, is there anything that's holding you back from hiring me? Right.
Okay.
And some people say yes to this question, some people say no to this question. I think this question is a win-win situation.
When would you advise this question? In the interview or the phone interview?
No, the interview. No, after the interview, at the very end, where it's like, do you have any questions for me? Right? Okay. That's where like the interviewers will always ask.
That sounds a lot like my sales call. It's like, based on our discussion, is there any reason you wouldn't want to move forward? Like,
well,
no.
I mean, when you're working, you're selling, right? And I have this book here all the time, like Dan Pink, To Sell Us. Okay. We are always selling ourselves in one way or another. Your resume is a marketing tool. So is your LinkedIn profile. Everything that you're doing is signaling and selling and branding in some form or another. And so when you are at the end of the interview, if you want feedback, and you want feedback in a way that's like, that's real and that you can actually work on it. So if you ask, like, is there anything that's leaving you with hesitancy in picking me and hiring me? Yeah. Well, you will actually hear feedback. That's when you actually hear it's like, if they say like, no, we have no feedback, but we think you're, they'll tell. That basically means they think you're great. If they have feedback, they're like, oh, well, we would have preferred you to have a little bit more experience here or there. And then that's when you could step in and say, oh, but I actually do. You look here, or I have something that's similar in my past experience, and that's where you can defend yourself, right? And that gives you a fighting chance to to hold off any rejection that they have. And then at that point, you strengthen your case. And if they give you feedback where you cannot defend, then what you have to work on. What's your growth? What are some areas of growth for your own career? And that's why it's like it's a win-win-win situation to ask this question at the very end. And you preempt it. You preempt even having to ask them for feedback by asking this question.
Yeah, and it's important to know this is going to be a rarity. I don't think hiring managers are as open to give every single candidate feedback. I've seen people go to two rounds of interviews and get no feedback, right? But at the same time, it entirely depends on who the actual hiring managers are. Some people are very open. Listen, we're looking for someone very assertive. In the interview, you came across really timid. Maybe that's something you can work on in the future. Whereas some people just go with a generic. Because you realize the amount of people interview at these companies, we have templates for everything. If you didn't pass the interview, we just hit a button, template for chose someone else. And it was like, hey, thank you so much for interviewing. We've gone with someone else. And it's not always the case that it was because you lacked experience, and there might be more technicalities, but sometimes a hiring manager are in this silo of their own decision making where they've decided who they want to go with, maybe because they like their personality better, whatever it is. They don't want to have to explain their decision. They're just like, we've made this decision. We just want to go with this candidate. Sorry, you didn't make the cut,
Well, and I think it comes down to it also, the fact of the matter is you need to know how to connect with people. That when you enter into the interview, and that's your opportunity to make a connection with the hiring manager. And essentially, if you're able to have the soft skills to know how to connect with anybody, that's important. And that's one of the things that I work with my clients is like, do you know how to mirror? Do you know how to read personality? And do you know how to match personality? So if you've been paying attention to our live stream right now, you would notice that Yasser and I, we speak at similar paces. We speak at similar tonalities because we are in sync with one another right now. Our brains are literally in sync because we're listening to each other and we're following each other, and we're basically synchronized. And so when you are in an interview, if you are meeting an introverted hiring manager and they're the one making the decision, you need to speak slower. You need to speak quieter. It's within their comfort zone. Now, you also have to match the role. So if you're entering an interview where they want you to be a customer service representative, then you want to be a little bit more, extroverted. You want to be a little bit happier. You want to be a little positive, have that smile, speak at a pace and project properly. But at the same time, you got to keep in mind, is the hiring manager also like that, right? And so it's a juggling act. So do you know how to signal the proper persona for a certain position? Even if it's like, perhaps slightly stretching yourself in that manner, but being able to mirror that and know the tools to do it. So for another example, leaning forward. If your interviewer leans forward, wait 2-3 seconds, lean forward as well. Don't do it in a creepy way. Like if someone does this and you do that right away, that's kind of weird. But you cross your legs, you cross your legs. They speak slow, speak slow. They speak, quieter, then you speak quieter as well. Right.
And this situation has become a little bit more complicated because of virtual interviews. I have seen virtual interviews where the candidate will be this close to their phone, and on the interview, you can just see their face, and it's like the most awkward thing I've ever seen in my life. Can you imagine interviewing someone and it's like that? Just that close? So like there's a lot of things you got to worry about. But I think, Anas, hopefully we answered your question there. We just want to wrap it up because we've hit the 1 hour mark already. Thank you very much, Shelly. Love you, bro, so much. I think I've got a real fan here. Thank you very much, Glanto.
505, man.
I didn't even know I was a vlogger. Yes.
You're a vlogger?
now I'm a vlogger. Okay, great. Sarvani says, could you please do a session on informational interviews? Sarvani, you got it. We'll have that ready to go. I think this itself is a whole topic in of itself.
Yeah.
We'll do one last question from Shelly here. Is there such situations where a recruiter asks you to sign a contract like you have to work 2 years or say specific period of time? What do you think legally? Is this a thing in Canada?
From my understanding is, this is contract work, and there are contract situations where if you break the contract, you have to pay a certain fine or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're all free people. If you want to leave, you can leave, and you just have to, follow the contract and see see if it's legally binding and whether it's justified or not. And if it's not justified, then you can bring it to small claims court and just solve it there. But because a lot of things, sometimes people don't write legally sound contracts. But generally speaking, having a term in terms of contract work is pretty normal. I mean, it's definitely normal. And so what do you think?
Yeah, we see a lot of 3 month, 6 month, one year contract, especially with COVID. A lot of these permanent positions have actually been made into contract positions.
No one wants to commit right now.
No one wants to commit, and it's fairly normal. I think contract positions just come without benefits, at least some of them that I know, right? Is that the case, John?
Pretty much.
Right. Yeah. And some of them compensate you more because of the lack of benefits, but I don't think it's out of, I think 2 years. I have seen a 2 year contract, but I think 6 months and a year is more common. But
structure how they hire their employees through contracts, because they don't want to have that liability, and having a full-time employee is a totally different ballgame than just signing just a contract work. So
yeah, and not to mention there's so many times where I've seen a contract role turn into a permanent role, because essentially what you're doing, where you're working every single day, you're showing them how competent you are, how well you fit in the team. They like you enough, they want you to continue the work. They'll say, hey, just join our team on a permanent basis, or they'll extend your contract.
Yeah, or someone just does contract continuous. I mean, I've seen cases where someone's been working on the same contract continuously for 10 years, renew every year kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Definitely seen a lot of that. Okay, well, Shelly, I hope we answered your question there. We have definitely gone over time with this live stream.
The goal, half an hour.
Yeah, we talk a lot. Very high functioning introverts.
Well, that's extroverted. We're both extroverted. We both like to, we both like our airtime. So
yeah, definitely. I just need an excuse to get on camera and hit the live button. But guys, if you had a good time with this live stream, if you want more questions, please leave it down on LinkedIn. John, where can everyone find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Tam, PhD, or you can find me on YouTube, Dr. John Tam, and pretty much every other social media platform. I'm there as Dr. John Tam, DrJonTam.
Okay. And if people want your services, what kind of services do you offer, and where can they find it?
So I offer career clarity and career transition services. So basically what I do is I help people figure out their direction and how to navigate this transition. And you can learn more about it pretty much on LinkedIn and on my featured section, or you can check out my YouTube. Pretty much all there, it's in all the details, in all the comments.
Cool. We'll include that in the YouTube section, or you can just go to John's LinkedIn profile. Again, if you'd like to work with me, I help people get job interviews. That's my specialty. You can find out more about that in the description. It is application only, so it'll depend on what your situation is. If you want to find me on LinkedIn.
You're so well versed in like the whole life, and you got the whole like.
Dude, I have done this enough times, man. I know how to do it.
You're like, you're good.
I didn't even wrap it up yet. But guys, if you are having a good time here, please give me a follow. Give Jonathan a follow. Give me a subscribe on YouTube. Like the video on YouTube. Leave a comment about what you'd like to see next, because Jonathan and I, we talk all the time anyway. We'd love to do more live streams for you. Okay, so hopefully in the future, you'll let us know what topics you're interested in. John, any last words?
It was a blast, man.
It was an absolute blast, guys. We'll see you very soon. Take care of yourselves.
Bye-bye.